record button. Great. So thank you everyone for joining us on this Sunday. My name is Ananya. I'm the founder of Uni Discovery. Some of you may know me. Some of you who don't, hello and welcome. Uni Discovery was formed with the aim to bridge the gap between universities and students. So that's where the name comes from. And we want to essentially help all students, whether that's preparation for their undergrads abroad or their graduate programs, masters and MBAs abroad, which is what this session is aimed towards with your GMAT prep, with respect to test prep, career development, guidance, documentation, so many different factors that go into selecting the right university to applying for the right university. And of course, test prep is a part which you cannot forego. It's just one of the most important aspects. Take it from someone who's been through this journey and has given her GMAT as well. We've really curated this session with one of the most stellar teachers within the GMAT space so that you can get access to what really sticks when it comes to applications, how the GMAT actually works, what are certain concepts that you want to keep in mind, because at the end of the day, it's not just about English, verbal, or quant. It's really about the concepts and the tips and the tricks that you'll be applying. At the end of the day, it's a well-designed exam, so you need to know your way around the exam as well, rather than just knowing how to speak English or how to do basic maths, which as Indians, we all do know how to. So that's kind of what the aim of this session is. And now I'd like to pass on the floor to Anshuman to give his introduction and kick this off. So do take copious notes, and we look forward to you reaching out as well with the information we shared in the chat. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Ananya, for that. So before we kick it off, just a bit about myself. So I'm a GMAT coach, a GMAT and a GRE coach. I've been teaching for GMAT and GRE over the last 8 years. I'm an engineer from Pilani, and as is the case with engineers, they go on to do something else altogether, right? Rather than be involved in the core engineering field. I hold a 99th percentile on GMAT. I am a GMAT 770 scorer with a V45. I've headed academic teams for the IMS. Back in the day, I was the content lead with Jamboree, which is quite a known name. And I've been the content lead for eGMAT curriculum development as well. So I've had quite a lot of experience in both teaching and second curating curriculums, courses, the best practices that would help our students to take the most out of whatever relevant course that we have to offer. Now, what is the purpose of this webinar? Obviously, this webinar is called the Step-by-Step Guide to a 720 Plus. But more than anything else, what I aim to achieve through this webinar is to let you guys be very clear of what does it take to really crack a 720 plus. 720 plus would be a 95th percentile on GMAT, which means what does it take for you to be in the top 5% of the test takers? What are the kind of skills that you need to possess? What is the kind of mindset that you need to have? What are the things that you need to be careful about, so on and so forth. The purpose of this webinar is not to give you conceptual knowledge of quant and verbal. We'll briefly touch upon it. What are the prerequisites? What are the things that you'd be focusing on both quant verbal? But it doesn't get into the subject specific areas, let's say SC or CR. We will do a few questions through which I'll drive home certain points so that you get more clarity about what the test taker tests through GMAT. And what your mind frame should be when preparing for GMAT. So the idea is for this webinar to be take it as a source from which you can gain clarity about your current state of prep and what you really need to do. The reason for that is there's just so much information out there available, and everyone has had a different GMAT story, right? Every student tackles GMAT in their own way, has a different story, has different focal points, takes different kind of time to ace the exam. So with so much information out there, it's very obvious that, and it's very natural that you guys can often get confused. So the idea is here to cut the clutter, if I may call it that, and let your focus come back to what it should be. Let's make it interactive. As I said, there are not a lot of people out here, so let's make use of that, get as many questions of yours answered, whichever state of prep you're from. And before we start, I just want to get a bit of an idea about the audience present here. How many of you have already started with your GMAT prep? If you can please type a yes in the chat, it'll give me a great idea about where you guys currently are. You can just share your current GMAT prep status, whether you're yet to start, whether you've already started, whether you'll be retaking GMAT, any of them, because I'll then, I'll then deliver the session accordingly. Thanks, Joeta. Thanks, Kriti. Yeah, whether you've started with the prep, started with verbal, so not for quant, that is interesting. Means probably you're starting with, you'll be preparing for quant on your own, yet to start. So some of you are yet to start, some of you have already started. Anyone who's a retaker, anyone who's already appeared for GMAT or GRE before this? Any plans to retake the exam? All right. Seems like most of you are either yet to start or you've just started it. Now let's get underway. What we'll talk about, as I said, is exactly what is it that you would need to get to the score of 95th percentile or the 720 plus. We'll talk about the ideal duration for the prep, and more importantly, the duration for your prep, for the duration of prep that would take you to a 720 plus, because the duration varies for different students. And I'll keep giving examples of my own students to make you more aware of how things may be different for different individuals and how really you need to chart your own course. We'll talk about, though there are no students here who've already taken the GMAT, so probably point 3 won't really get talked about much. Towards the end of the session, we'll talk about the new GMAT Focus Edition and whether it is relevant for you at this stage or not. We'll also briefly touch upon GMAT versus GRE, whether going for GMAT makes more sense or going for GRE makes more sense for the ones who haven't started with their GMAT prep. Now, why is GMAT even an important part of your application process? Ananya mentioned that it's a very important part, right? The admission committees look at the GMAT score, and the greater the GMAT score, the better your chances of getting noticed, right? So it does grab your eyeballs. A great GMAT score does grab your eyeballs, make no mistake about it. But why is that the case? Why would B schools really care for GMAT? The reason is very obvious, because the exam, to some degree, tests and gives a very good indication of the kind of potential manager or a leader you may be in the future, because that's what the B schools care about. And which is indicative of the fact that what GMAT tests you for, beyond just the math and English, are the managerial skills, a skill set that will make you a good manager or a great leader in future. So though this is not absolute, there are other parts on your, in your application process as well. But GMAT is a test designed to test your skills beyond just the concepts. And it won't be wrong to say that the greater your GMAT score, potentially you're a better manager. So someone with a 750 is potentially a better manager with someone, when compared to someone with a 7 or maybe a 650. As Ananya said, it's not the only piece, but the test is designed keeping the needs of the B schools in mind, right? And this is what gets us to the main point of this entire session. To aim for a 720 plus, which I'm sure that a lot of you people are targeting a 720 plus, maybe if there are a few of you who are targeting deferred MBA programs, you may be targeting a score of even 750 or higher. So it's imperative to know what it takes to get into the top 5% or top 2% of the test takers, right? And this is the broad skill set, if I may call it that you need. So I've divided it into 4 buckets, right? The 2 of which we are all too familiar with, which are the quant, math, and the verbal or the English basics. We need all the 4. We need to possess all the 4 to be able to crack that score of 720 plus. So comfort with basic maths, absolutely must. The syllabus is divided into 3 categories. We'll talk about that. Comfort with data sufficiency, which is considered to be the trickier aspect of GMAT quant. You obviously need to first get acquainted to that and over time get comfortable with data sufficiency and then master it if you are to crack that score of 720 plus. The good thing about Gmat Quant is it has a very well-defined syllabus, unlike some of the Indian exams like CAT, you know, CAT or ZAT or some of the other entrance exams for some of the Indian B schools. Same goes for verbal. You definitely need to have a very strong hold on English grammar, which is necessary for sentence correction. You need to have a sense of how to analyze an argument, how to dissect an argument to understand the various parts. This is critical for critical reasoning, and a strong comprehension for reading comprehension, right? So goes without saying, you need both the quant or the math basics and the verbal or the English basics. But the test is not really testing you for math or English, as I said. It tests you for the managerial skills out there. So the key skills that Gmat will test you for are reasoning, inference, comprehension, analysis. What are these skills in the first place? So reasoning is, unlike, think of reasoning as knowing the concept, but at the same time knowing how to use and apply the concept in a given situation. So the quicker you are with reasoning, the stronger your reasoning, the better you would be through navigating, an effective solution on an effective route to get to the solution through given problem. It's a key skill for a manager to possess. Inference is like reading between lines, gauging or deducing something that is not explicitly said out there. It's a very, very important skill for a leader to have. A leader should have a vision. What differentiates a leader from others is the vision. A leader sees things that others don't. Inference is all about that. Comprehension is about gauging the situation, understanding the situation, no matter how complex it may seem to be. Comprehension is something that gets tested on both quant and verbal. Analysis of a problem obviously is key for any good manager. Analysis comes before proposition of any kind of solution. So these are the skills that get tested across the board for both quant and verbal, right? Make no mistake. And this is where the most of the prep would be focused at, beyond just the concepts. And last but not the least, your mental makeup, your ability to stay focused for a long period of time, because it's a lengthier test. It's almost a 3-hour, 15-minute test, and your attention to detail. One very important thing is your ability to stay calm under pressure. You need all the 4 of these to be checked. You need to have checked all these 4 boxes for you to claim that you're prepared to get to a 720 plus. If you fall short on either one of these or any one of these 4, you may not end up getting a 720 plus. If you're great with the basics on math, on English, if you have the skills as well, but you're a very nervy, very jittery kind of a person who tends to really panic on the test day, you're not going to get a 720 plus. So the last bit doesn't get talked about often, but it is as key a component as any. One of the greatest allies for a test taker is a very stable and a calm mind, an unfazed mind. So we'll talk about that as well. This is almost like counterintuitive. No one talks about, when we think of Gmat prep, our attention doesn't go to the last box. But often, and Ananya would know this because she comes across a lot of people who, despite having a lot of goods conceptually and being brilliant academically, may falter, may come short when it comes to the mental makeup and being really focused. So we'll talk about all the 4 aspects. Now, this is one thing that you just need to know to always keep yourselves on the right track. Yeah. How do you gauge whether you're on the right track or not? You gauge whether you're there, whether you're absolutely comfortable with all the math basics that Gmat expects you to be familiar with. I choose my words carefully when I say expect to be familiar with. Same goes for verbal. Do you have the skills developed to the extent that they should be? And at the same time, are you someone who has the focus, who has the stamina to sit for 3.5 hours and has great attention to detail, even when you're tiring out, and has a calm mind to let the skills come into play? Reasoning, inference, comprehension, and analysis can only happen when you have a stable mind, a calm mind, when you're unhurried, when you're unrushed. So only when you have these 4 are you, or would you rather be able to crack a 720 plus? Yeah. So as I said, I'll talk about the details of all of these. But this is your one sheet that you can always keep handy. You can take a screenshot of it to always, you know, evaluate yourself. Are you short on either one of these four? If you are, that is the area that you need to work upon. It can be the basics of math, or it can be your mental makeup, whatever it may be. And unless you check all these four boxes, you're not prepared for 720 plus. Now, how do we check ourselves for these four boxes? That is what the GMAT prep is all about. Let's talk about quant first. Now, when we say quant, especially the people who, let's say, haven't been in touch with in math, or haven't been in touch with math for a long amount of time. Some of you may be working professionals who've been working for the last 4 or 5 years, and you've last done math back in your +1, +2, or even before that, in your 10th. You guys tend to be very wary of how would I really cope up with quant on the GMAT. Well, the good thing is GMAT syllabus is very well defined, unlike CAT, and it's a much smaller syllabus than some of the Indian P-school tests. It is divided into 3 parts: arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and you only need to be familiar with about 150 concepts in total. This 150 may seem like a big ass number. It's not, because quite a few of these 150 concepts are the concepts that you already know. For instance, what's the area of a triangle? I'm sure most of you know it, it's half base height. If you're someone who forgot the area of a triangle is half base height, we need to revive it. There are no two ways about it, because without the basics, we can't do. But the good thing is GMAT doesn't really expect you to be familiar with advanced math concepts, right? If you're clear with the basics, that is good enough. Why so? Because testing you for quant, or testing how much of a quant god or a quant genius you are, is not really their focus. Quant basics and the verbal basics only serve uh, as the basis for them to be able to test you for the skills that I've just talked about. And we'll see that playing up in the questions that we'll discuss. So the good thing, even for those who are scared of quant, and I'm sure that there are quite a bit of you out there who don't think that math is a favorite subject, GMAT quant is very doable, no matter where you start up from. Obviously, the more you struggle with quant, the greater the time that you'll take, but it is still very manageable because it doesn't test you for advanced math concepts. Now, this is the statement from the makers of the GMAT. And I think it's a very important thing to understand, and for you to be clear about what the GMAT prep should be all about. Keep in mind that the knowledge of basic math, while necessary, so necessary implies you can't do without it. If you don't know the basics, you need to sort it out. You need to be comfortable with the basics, but at the same time, basics are all you need, not the advanced concept. The knowledge of basic math, while necessary, is seldom sufficient in answering GMAT questions. Why? Because that's not what they're testing. Unlike traditional math problems that you've encountered in school, GMAT quant questions require you to apply your knowledge of math. And in this application is where the skills that I talked about would come into the play. So beyond getting comfortable with the concepts, which is an important part, but is definitely not the trickiest part of GMAT prep, the main focus shifts to, first of all, development, and then the mastery of the skills, which will really propel your score to that 720 plus. I'll take an example. Now, why GMAT prep looks very different, why the GMAT quant questions look very different. I won't go into the details of it, but I'd like to touch upon one little aspect. I talked about comprehension as one of the key skills that gets tested on your exam. Would you believe me when I say that the GMAT quant section also tests you for comprehension? That doesn't make sense, right? Because when we think comprehension, we think of RCs. But according to the makers, and this again is from the makers, it's a statement right out of the official guide. GMAT tests comprehension not just through the reading comprehension, but other questions in the verbal, which are the critical reasoning and the sentence correction. Not just that, it tests comprehension through problem solving and data sufficiency in quant as well. Why would it do that? You may be a tad surprised, because when we think of comprehension, we relate it as an English skill. But comprehension is about being on top of the information that has been provided to you. And it gets tested through quant all the time. That is why GMAT quant questions look different from the questions that you might have encountered back in your school days, or even in CAT, if any one of you has taken CAT in the past. This is an official question on Gmat. A question that tests you for comprehension, hardly any math. So let's engage with this question. Just try this question and share with me what you feel is the answer to the problem, and then we'll quickly discuss this one. Just attempt this one. And once you have the answer, you can just share it on the chat. Probably half a minute to a minute more, and then we'll talk about this one. Anyone who has an answer yet? If you do, please share it on the chat. All right, let's talk about this. So no answers. Probably this one really challenged you, and it's taking you a tad longer. That is good. Anna and Shobit, good job. The correct answer is E. Now, why did it take so long for you guys to get to the answer? It's really a nothing question mathematically, but it's still a hard question on the Gmat scale. So what is it that makes it hard? Now, I'll just talk about it. The purpose why I picked this question is not really to get to discuss the solution, which I'll do quickly, but is to rather acknowledge and understand the underlying skill that this question tests, and the reason why the question is designed in the manner that it is. It's an official question. It's an actual Gmat question from the past. Now, there's a tendency to read the statement in its entirety. And the thing with questions with lengthier question stems is it has a lot of information. When you just read it like a paragraph, you're trying to accomplish two things. Number one, you're trying to remember every piece of information as you go along. And secondly, when you do that, you want to try make sense of it and reason it out as you read. So you're trying to do two things in tandem. You want to remember information, and you want to make sense of how you would navigate the question. When you are done reading the question, inevitably, because the question has a lot of information, you won't remember all of it. So it's very likely that you'll end up going back to the question and solving it again, or rather reading it again. When you read it again, you will lose out on time or take extra time than should be, than is required really to solve the question. And secondly, you'll get more exhausted because you're trying to remember information rather than simply make note of it. So how does one then go about solving questions like these? This is where comprehension comes in. Comprehension is the most effective way of dealing with excess information. It is as simple as that. It's a very important skill for a manager to have because it's important for a manager to process information that may be not very straightforward. So how you go about this, and this is just indicative of how we'll go about strengthening comprehension for quant. You take it sentence by sentence. So 4 extra large sandwiches of the same size were ordered for M students where M is greater than 4. Nothing really for me to jot down here. Everything is out there. 3 of the sandwiches were divided among the students. Now, this particular sentence gives you some important information that you can work with. If you instead decide to move on and read the question, you'll end up reading the question again, which will cost you time. It will cost you effort. Not advisable. What you should rather do is convert this statement into the relevant mathematical expression or equation. 3 were divided among M students, so everyone gets 3 by M of it. Right now, I've simply taken that line, converted it into the relevant math expression. I'll move on. I'll never have to remember this stuff because I have it jotted here in the form that I need. Since 4 students did not want any of the 4th sandwich, it was evenly divided among the remaining students. The 4th sandwich, which is a single sandwich, gets divided among the remaining students. Remaining is 4 students do not want the last one. So the remaining obviously would be M minus 4. So I've made an expression out of the second line as well. The last line, if Carol ate one piece from each of the 4 sandwiches, that means Carol ate this and Carol ate this as well. The amount of sandwich that she ate would be what fraction of the whole extra large sandwich. All that we had to do, all the math that there is to this question is just adding these two. That is it. And still, it's a hard question on Gmat scale. Why is it hard? Because to comprehend this question effectively in the given amount of time is not the easiest things to do. Even though the question doesn't require any advanced math from you, it's a hard question on Gmat scale. And those of you who may have started with the Gmat prep, you may have already encountered questions like these. So we can't have an approach that is simply about prepping for math. We need to have a slightly different approach that is more suited to helping you develop the necessary skills. This question was just a case in point. Yeah, good job, Anna and Shobit. I hope the rest of the guys are clear here as well. This is, as I said, just an indication, but we learn how to develop comprehension over the course of the preparation. The point is, you need to do just more than learn math concepts. We need to develop skills. Right. I'll move on. Yes, Utsav, it is. And it comes with the understanding. It comes with the knowledge and familiarity with what goes in the mind of the maker of the exam. The more you're familiar with what the exam will test you for, the more you'll prepare yourself accordingly. And the more you'll be better prepared. The verbal aspect of it. Before I talk about it, in case any of you have questions that you kind of want me to address, we do have a Q&A section towards the end of the session, or you can leave it in the chat. I'll try and answer that then and there. But it's very likely that quite a few of your questions get addressed as the session goes on. So I'll really encourage that you keep your questions with yourself and kind of save it for the Q&A session. We do have that session exclusively to sort out any issues or any concerns that you might have. Now, the Gmat verbal sentence correction, we often think of it as grammar. Obviously, there's a lot of grammar involved when it comes to verbs, modifiers, parallelism, the sentence structure, the pronouns, the idioms, etc. All of that comes into play. And yes, you need to have those basics covered. But at the same time, SC is so much more than just grammar. And lately, the focus has shifted from testing you for grammar to testing you for meaning, which is where the logic would come into play, right? Does the sentence convey something that is logical in the real world beyond just being grammatically correct? Secondly, grammar is limited just to the SC part. It doesn't even come up in reading comprehension or critical reasoning. And yet, a lot of not just students, a lot of tutors rather end up just teaching grammar. Gmat verbal is hardly about grammar. It is mostly about skills like inference, attention to detail, and reasoning. Obviously, comprehension. So grammar is limited to SC, and know that SC is so much more than grammar. It is about the meaning, the logical meaning of a sentence beyond a sentence being grammatically correct. The hardest SC questions would not test you for grammar, would rather test you for meaning. So grammar is like a stepping stone. The main thing is again the skills. RC cannot be mastered without having a strong comprehension. In name of RC prep, a lot of tutors that I know personally end up teaching you gimmicks, tricks, how to read certain parts of the of the passage, so on and so forth. That should not be the focus at all. If you really want to tackle RC to the extent that you end up getting into the top 5% of the test takers, you have to strengthen your comprehension. We'll tell you how, but there's no other way around it. Critical reasoning, as the name implies. Critical reasoning tests your higher order reasoning skills, and we'll tackle a couple of critical reasoning questions, one easy, one hard. And we'll try and understand that. What is it that really makes a hard one hard? For you to get more aware of the skills and how they come into play. So, something that I've already addressed. GMAT is a test of your skills, not concepts. Basic concepts are an absolute must, but the test is not focused on testing you for concepts. The test rather assumes that you already know the basic stuff. And hence, on the basis of those conceptual basics, it tests you for the skills that I've just talked about. Now, this figure is indicative of what is it that makes a hard question hard on a GMAT scale. So there are three categories primarily. These are the same three categories, by the way, that you'll find on GMAT Club if any one of you has used GMAT Club. The sub 600 questions, the 600 to 700 level questions, and the 700 plus level questions. These categories or bifurcations are not ideal, but because this is the popular lingo, I've chosen to go on with this. So what differentiates a sub 600 question from a 700 plus is not how hard the concept is, but rather the extent to which it would test your skills. Someone with great conceptual knowledge will get the sub 600 question correct, but may not necessarily get the 700 plus question correct unless their skills are developed to the extent, right? So conceptual clarity is required across difficulty levels, for the very easiest to the very hardest. And it really doesn't change much. It may be surprising to you, but trust me, it really doesn't change much because it's not their focus to test you for advanced concepts. The skills, however, drastically change. The skills tested on the harder questions are much more advanced. Let's see these coming into play. Now, this is a sub 600 level question. I want you to just try this and share your answer with me on the screen. Would require you to be familiar with the concept of absolute value. Maybe you're not yet, which is absolutely fine. The point is not to teach you absolute value. The point is just to showcase to you how skills come into play and how they dictate the difficulty level of a problem. So just give this on a try and tell me what you think. In case you've forgotten what absolute value is, absolute value essentially gives you a positive end result, right? So mod of or absolute value of -5 is 5. Absolute value of 5 is also 5. So with this knowledge in mind, try answering this question. Noted, Shreyas. Yeah, awaiting answers from others as well. Interesting, Anna. We'll talk about this. Right, Shobit. You see how much easier this question seems from the comprehension question that we did. Absolutely correct. So Anna, E won't be the answer because E lies to the left of 2. So absolute value of E would be something less than 2, isn't it? But absolute value of A, which is -2, would be equal to 2, right? So A is quite clearly the answer. A really straightforward question. What you required was conceptual understanding of what absolute value is. This is a sub 600 level question, an actual question from the past, by the way. It's an actual Gmat question. Not really too much skill required. All you had to do was interpret the number line. That's it. And that is very straightforward. Not much of a skill required, just understanding of the concept, being clear with the concept, ensures that you get this kind of a question correct. Yeah. Let's try a slightly more difficult question. Concept required, absolute value. Skill required, pretty basic. Let's try this one. So what this is absolute value of x into y is greater than absolute value of y into x. Take a minute for this one and share with me what you feel should be the answer. The idea is that you try it and appreciate why this is a tougher question. That is all the idea. It's okay if you don't get it right. That is absolutely fine. But we do want to acknowledge the skills that would come into play when we solve this. Noted, Utsav. Good job. Trying at least. I'll let you know whether the answer is correct or not in a bit. Anyone who feels any option is the answer, please feel free to share. Yeah. Let nothing hold you back. There are no rights and wrongs here, except for the wrong answer, of course. Just kidding though. Share whatever you get as the answer. It doesn't matter. All right. I'll discuss this one. Now, this is a really hard question. This is almost like a 750 level question. Thanks, Shresh and Shobit. I'm afraid none of those answers are correct. The correct answer is B. Let's talk about it. Now, you need the same concept, but the skills that come into play are much more advanced. That is what makes this question a hard one. Right? The inference and the reasoning come into play here. I'll talk about that in a bit. Inference, as I said, inference is about reading between lines. Can I say Shobit, Shreyash, and Utsav? I don't really know the values of the left-hand side and right-hand side, but what I'm sure of is at least the magnitude of mod xy and mod yx would be the same. I don't know what their signs are, but can I say at least the magnitudes would be the same? Because essentially you have absolute value of x into y on the left-hand side and absolute y into x on the right-hand side. I'm not sure what the signs would be, but the magnitude of it would be the same. Yes, Anna. If the magnitudes of two quantities are same, still one is greater than the other. Can I infer that one of them has to be positive and the other negative? That's the only way it can happen. Two quantities with same magnitude, yet one is greater than the other. For instance, 5 is greater than -5. 10 is greater than minus 10. So I infer that the left-hand side is positive, the right-hand side is negative. Now, this was a very fine skill to use because it's not the easiest. Inference is one of the trickiest to master. But observe that I haven't really solved anything. I didn't make cases into let x be positive, y be positive. No, none of that. I've simply have observed the inequality. If the left-hand side has to be positive, mod x is already positive because the absolute value is already positive. What that tells me is that y must be greater than 0, isn't it? Utsav, Anna. Similarly, I know the right-hand side must be negative, which means x must be negative. Do you concur? Just observing and inferring, that's it. Just making the necessary conclusions, nothing else. So this inequality is nothing but a complicated way of saying this. Yeah. And what was required was a skill of inference to come into play. And inference requires two things. Number one, a calm head and a very keen sense of attention. Inference can only happen when you're stable, when you're not rushed. Only then can you see things which are subtle, right? So that's an unsaid part of your prep, which no one talks about, which no one focuses on. So all this is saying is y is greater than 0 and x is less than 0. If y is greater than 0, can I not say that y is also greater than minus 2? Anything greater than 0 is also greater than minus 2, isn't it? Utsav, Anna, Shreyash. There's your answer, right? Was there too much math? Hardly. Did advanced skills come into play? Definitely. This is what made this question hard and a much more difficult question than the previous one, right? So these are the kind of skills that we'll aim to master, first of all, to develop and then to master as we go along our prep. So this was an example that I've taken on Quant. How with the same set of concept, the concept required here is not like advanced concept. It's the same concept of absolute value, but the skill required is definitely advanced. And that makes all the difference in the difficulty level of the problem. If you haven't understood it very well, it's absolutely fine. You may not have gone through the concept of absolute value. So Joyita, can I say xy is negative? Would you agree with me? If x is negative and y is positive, the product would be negative. If the product is less than 0, is it must that it must be greater than minus 2 or less than minus 2 for that matter? I can't really say, isn't it? If xy is less than 0, it may be less than minus 2. It may also be greater than minus 2. What I'm looking for is the must be true. Right? Awesome. Good job. So this question is a really tricky one, not just because inference comes into play, but the interpretation of the question and the options itself is also tricky, making it a hard question. So these are the things that we'll develop on beyond just the math. So after having done the absolute value concept, still you can get a very easy one on that concept, the same concept, and a very difficult one on the same concept. Let's see the same thing happening on verbal. This is a verbal critical reasoning question, a sub 600 question. I won't say absolutely easy. So we'll be coming to that, Shreyash. We'll talk about that fact as well. Just try this one. An actual question from the past again. Noted, Anna. Noted, Shobit. Joyita. Good job, guys. E is the correct answer. Right now, this is not the absolute easiest. This is between easy to medium. But you see how once you read the option E, it made perfect sense, right? Because what you want to weaken is the argument of a home builder. And the argument was because more than 90% of residential fires are extinguished by a household member, residential sprinklers would only marginally decrease property damage caused by residential fires. So what we need to achieve here is very straightforward. We want to weaken the argument, which means that the residential sprinklers would still make sense. Any option that suggests or tells me that the residential sprinklers will make, or rather would make a lot of sense, even financially, is the option that we're looking at. And E is very straightforward. Even though 90% of the fires are extinguished by the household members, E tells us that the largest proportion of property damage that results from residential fires is caused by fires that start when no household member is present. So those 10% are the ones that cause the greatest damage, not the other 90%. So for those kind of fires, the sprinklers would make a lot of sense, right? So E is the option that clearly weakens the argument of the home builder that the argument talks about. Straightforward. Let's contrast it with this one. Another actual question from the past. This is a hard one. Another weaken the argument question. I understand you may not have started with it, but I've chosen questions we don't require a lot of conceptual knowledge in the first, but rather the skills. So try this one and share with me what you feel should be the answer. Noted, Joyita. We'll discuss that. Take about a minute more and then we'll discuss this one. Anyone else who has an answer yet? All right. So only two people have answered this far. Quickly share your answer, whatever you may think. Let's discuss it now. So evidently trickier than the previous one, isn't it? Though based on the same underlying concept. Joyita went with A, Shreyash and Ankita go with B. The correct answer is E, right? So what is it that makes this question hard? Let's understand that. First of all, I hope everyone was clear of the fact that this is an except question. Anna, be confident about what you think then. Yeah, shouldn't hesitate. I'll talk about hesitation and, being very confident, how that is really important. E is the right answer. So let's first acknowledge that it's an except question, which means you need to select an option which actually does not weaken the conclusion. Okay, you want to talk about or you want to select the option which actually does not weaken the conclusion. Now let's see why A actually weakens the conclusion, and quite a few of you would agree with me that A is very relevant to the times that we currently live in, right? A lot of layoffs happening. Before we move on to analyzing these options, so the conclusion is obviously any workers who participate in a quality circles program will, as a result, become less satisfied with their jobs. Now, what happened was that the survey indicated that machine operators participating in the program were less satisfied after 2 years of program's existence than they were at the program start. Now, this is a fact that when the program ended, they were less satisfied. Ideally, their satisfaction should have improved. Now, they are pinning the quality circles program itself as a reason for that. Any weakener would take away the blame from the quality circles and put it on something else, or at least cast doubt on that. And we need to select an option which doesn't weaken the argument. A weakens the argument, Joyita. The second survey occurred during a period of recession and rumors of cutbacks and layoffs at large manufacturing were plentiful. So Joyita, is it not a possibility that because of those rumors, the participants or the workers felt restless and they were not at ease and they really were skeptical about their future in the company, which made them less satisfied? Very much a possibility, isn't it? So A is a definite weakener. It gives me enough to doubt that it was the quality circles that was the reason. It was probably the general sense of insecurity prevailing because of the recent cutoffs, the recent cutbacks and the layoffs. Quite a few of you went with B. The surveys also showed that those large machine operators who neither participated nor knew anyone reported the same degree of less unsatisfaction. Now, this is a very interesting option. Now, those who did not participate in the quality circles program, nor did they know anyone, and nor did they know anyone who did participate in the quality circles program, those people who did not participate also reported the same degree of less unsatisfaction. So if other people also reported a similar degree of lesser satisfaction, how can we be so sure that it was the quality circles program that was responsible? So it's a classic case of A caused C and B caused C. So people who participated in the quality circles program were less satisfied. People who did not participate in the quality circles program were also similarly less satisfied. So can I really pin out the reason for C? Both A and B cause C. So when I know C has happened, can I really be sure, Shreyash, that A was the reason or B was the reason? I can't be, isn't it? Just because there's a lesser degree of satisfaction, I cannot now, Ankita and Shobit, pin it on the quality circles, because evidently the people who did not take part in the quality circles also showed a similar degree of lesser satisfaction. So B is also a weakener, and hence B is also out. Yeah. No, you don't have to write it down, Shish, but you definitely must be aware of the conclusion and premise. That is definitely there. Anyway, that is something that we'll anyway cover in the sessions, right? That gets covered. But yes, being aware of the conclusion and premise is really important. It's very important. It's one of the key aspects of critical reasoning. And from that will actually is what will help us identify what a weakener would be or what a strengthener may be. So A and B are definite weaknesses and definitely not our answers because of that reason. Now let's look at the correct answer, which is E. The machine operators who participated reported that when the program started, they felt that participation might improve their work situations. Now, guys, how they felt before the program started, is that in any way helpful for me at all? Does that tell me anything whatsoever? Initially, they thought it would be helpful. It doesn't tell me what they thought at the end of it. It doesn't tell me whether they thought that the program was useless or useful. It doesn't give me anything. All it tells me that initially those participants thought that the program would be helpful. It's an absolutely neutral option which neither strengthens it nor weakens it. That's the answer E. So what is it that made this question harder than the previous one? The extent of analysis required for each of the options, do you see, is much greater when compared to the previous question, right? Even though we are still locating a weakener, and the differences between the options became subtle, more subjectivity came into play, and hence you had to be more aware of the premise and the conclusion. And the evaluation and the analysis of the option had to be more strict in that sense for you to really gauge whether it's a strengthener or a weakener. So this is again a 700 plus question, an actual question from the past. Same concept as the previous one, but the skill required definitely much more advanced. And guys, it's absolutely fine if you're still maybe only 70 to 80% clear. Obviously, we haven't talked about CR yet. These questions were just indicative, but you've tried it, you at least get to understand what is it that makes the harder one hard and the easier one easier, despite being based on the same concept, as far as the basics are concerned. So just to reiterate, because being aware of this is very, very, very important for your prep. For those of you who have started it and are just overtly concerned about the basics, basics are very important. But if you're not doing enough to develop your skills, you will falter, right? So start paying attention to these skills. And those of you who are yet to start, this knowledge will really hold you in a good stead, because it'll help you keep things in perspective. Yeah, it'll make you focus on the absolute must things, which are the skill development and obviously also the concept clarity and the comfort with the concepts. Yeah, so it's a test of your skills, Gmat, at the end of the day, and that is where largely your prep should be focused upon beyond conceptual clarity. That is what constitutes as the majority of the prep. So if I were to break down the prep, the various steps involved, and this is a broad roadmap, right? The amount of time that it may take you to go through these different steps may vary for an individual, but that is the sequential prep for Gmat. The first things first, the most important one to start off with is getting absolutely comfortable with the concepts, the basics. If you're someone who absolutely struggles with math, that should be your first priority. Getting comfortable with the math basics. Good thing is, as I said, Gmat doesn't test for advanced math. It tests for basic maths, and by dedicating a bit of a time consistently over a period of a month or two, you can ensure that you have the basics under control. It's a very preparable exam. Now, different people may take different time to get comfortable with the concepts. For some of you, it may only be a matter of a month. For some of you, it may take about 3 to 4 months as well, depending upon who you are as an individual and what are your strengths and weaknesses. But once you've gained the conceptual comfort, that is where you move on to developing skills, to understanding how the concepts are applied What are the factors that constitute reasoning? We understood reasoning. We saw how that came into play in that absolute value question. We understood inference. We saw how that came into play in the critical reasoning question. So the more we are on top of the analysis as to how these skills come into play in the actual GMAT question, the relevant practice problems, the more you develop the skills, the better you are prepared to tackle the harder questions, which you'll definitely encounter if you're looking for a score like a 720 plus. This is the biggest part of our prep. Make no mistakes. Developing skills. That would be what the live sessions would be focused on as well. Last but not the third step is the identification of the gap. At any stage, your prep should always be about you being on top and you being very clear about where you're at, which means what are the things that you're struggling with. And obviously, I as a mentor would be there to help you with that. So identifying the gaps is what would help you have intent for practice, because practice is about filling the gaps, overcoming your issues. Practice is a very corrupted word. It's not just about solving tons of questions. It's about doing the things that are required for you to get better, the things at which you're not yet great at. That is what practice is. So once you've identified the gap, you can really have a nice intent for practice, and you can target your efforts to the areas and the sections that you're weaker at. So this is what you can break down the prep as. Now, getting to the question, the ever important question of how long does it take to prepare for a 720 plus? And I would hate to disappoint you in the fact that there's no perfect answer to this. And I have good reasons for that. Because when you're talking about being prepared for a 720 plus, you're expected to have all these 4 boxes checked. The box that I talked about very initially, you're expected to have all these 4 boxes checked. However long it takes for you to do this is the time that you take to prepare yourself. I will still give you an average figure though, because as an average, based on the data of the students that I've taught, it takes anywhere between 3 to 4 months on an average for students from the start to their first GMAT attempt. That being said, I've had students who've started with their prep and scored a 720 within a month of preparation. And I've had students who've taken over a year and they've slowly moved from a score of 550 to 720 over that duration. Because if to traverse that journey from your starting point to 720 is not the same length for everyone. And hence the amount of effort that goes into it would obviously be different for everyone. But for a large chunk of the majority, it would be an average of about 3 to 4 months from the absolute starting to the first attempt. Yeah. More important question than how long would it take is what do I need to get better at to get to 720 plus, and what kind of an effort it would then take for you to put in return to have those returns. What kind of an effort would it take from your end to get better at the things that you're not yet great at? Yeah. Now, the last 2 parts, the quant and the verbal basics, everyone knows about it. But the key skills, not a lot of people talk about it, especially the people who teach for math and English. A lot of GMAT tutors, especially for verbal, are English tutors who may not necessarily have that kind of a strength or mastery over RC and CR where all these skills come into play. But good GMAT tutors know how it's about the skills. And the skills are much more subtler than concepts, because I don't have a formula for skill. These skills get developed over time. Formula can be taught and you can start applying it immediately after I tell you the formula. There's no big deal in that. But skills are mastered over time. The last but not the least, the mental makeup. I'll share a story with you. So one of my students very recently, she was scoring 700 plus across mocks, be it official or other. But she was just really fearful of the outcome. So she and her mom, she has a dream of going to certain colleges in Europe for which she needs a 710 or 720, something in that zone. And she was like, sir, if I don't get the score, I'm done. I'm dead. All this effort would go to the waste. And she ended up absolutely messing her test. She got a 590, which was, 100 points lesser than what she was getting in the mocks. So it doesn't get talked about often, but you really need to start practicing having a settled and a calm mind, not just for the test in general, because it's a great skill for a manager to have a focused, calm mind, right? And it'll do you a world of good. As I said, a calm mind is your greatest ally for any competitive test or for any competitive field for that matter. So you need to have checked all the four boxes for you to be able to prepare for that. And on an average, though, it takes 3 to 4 months. I said I'll talk about uh, this particular topic, Gmat versus GRE, because that's a very important question, especially for the ones who want to start with Gmat and yet are confused. What should they go off with? There's no, it's not like Gmat is better than GRE or and especially, and Ananya probably would help me ascertain this fact, that the admission committees don't have a preference for one over the other nowadays, isn't it? They are good with either as long as have you great score. What would then decide you, or what would then dictate which test is better suited for you, is to be aware of what these tests will test you for. GMAT is more skill oriented. GRE is probably slightly less skill oriented. Skills do come into play, don't get me wrong. But on that front, GRE is slightly easier. GMAT is more grammar heavy when it comes to sentence correction. GRE is more vocabulary heavy. You are supposed to be familiar with the meaning of some really difficult words. If you're okay doing that, GRE is a great fit for you. GMAT has a slightly shorter test duration. GRE is a longer test, so you need more stamina. And don't get me wrong, it's not easy to sit for 3.5 hours and maintain that same level of engagement and attention to detail in the last section as well. So you can try taking a mock of both of these and see for yourself which test fits you better. We can help you with both because both are very similar tests largely. There are a few things that are different, but to the great extent, the syllabus is same. 80% of the math syllabus is same. I would say 65, 2/3 of the verbal syllabus is also same. The focus on the skills is slightly different. So on that front, the prep is little different, but you can still prepare for both and make a switch whenever required. Just be aware of this factor. Should you wait for the GMAT Focus Edition and prepare for the GMAT Focus Edition instead? There are a lot of good things about GMAT Focus Edition. For the starters, it's a much shorter test. It's only a 2-hour, 10-minute test as compared to the current 3-hour, 10 or 3-hour, 15 minutes. So it's a much shorter test. The scoring is better. It's more segregated. You get rewarded for doing well on the test. For instance, currently, if you score Q51, you're amongst the top 3% of the test scorers. So there's no way to differentiate between the top 3% scorers in Quant. That is supposedly going to get changed in GMAT Focus Edition. The most important change, though, is in the verbal section, that it has completely chugged out sentence correction. Big news, great news for the test takers, because it really throws grammar out of the picture, isn't it? It's good for the test taker. But there are a few cons, and cons not specifically with regards to the test, but cons for you who are thinking of applying in first and second rounds. The estimated launch is towards the end of the year, and that is an estimate. It's very likely that it may get pushed to the next year as well, which means that if you're willing to apply in the cycles that are coming up, it really doesn't make much of a sense for you to wait till the GMAT Focus Edition. You have to prepare now with the version available right now. Right? So no way, no, it doesn't make sense for you to wait for the Focus Edition if you're someone who's targeting round 1 and round 2 deadlines. Even round 3, I can say, because we don't know how the test will pan out to be, what the acceptance of the new version would be in the, amongst the admission committees. All those things are a few question marks. So if you're targeting the upcoming rounds, go for the current version of the GMAT. I'll open it up to the questions now. And before I answer any question, I think I had Shrey's question that he had asked. How long should you take to answer a hard level or a 700 plus level question? When you're very nicely prepared, ideally you should not take more than 3 minutes for a CR question. Maybe 3 minute 15 seconds. Initially, though, you'll take longer because you'll first get used to the skills. And initially, we don't obsess too much about the speed, rather the understanding and you getting comfortable with the concepts and the application is something that we focus more on. Speed will gradually improve as we go on. Shesh, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Any other questions that you may have regarding your own prep? Any doubts that you may have regarding any of the sections? Please type in the chat. I'd be happy to take those. By the way, you can obviously reach out to Ananya and team for the next steps, right? We have all sorts of options of prep available depending on what suits you more, be it the live batches, be it the one-on-ones, whatever would be the best fit for you. So stagnant scores. So stagnant scores indicate stagnant skill levels, Joita. That's why the scores aren't propelling, because your conceptual understanding, I'm sure it's there because you worked on those. Your conceptual understanding either would have improved or would have at least remained same. But if the scores are still stagnant, you probably haven't improved on the skills. You really need to be on top of analysis of why is it that you're falling short on some of the questions. Be absolutely clear of the reasons. And this goes beyond just reading solution. Yeah. Engage and get your doubts sorted with your teacher. Being really clear about what your issues are is not the easiest things, but you really need to figure out where are your skills not developed to the extent that they should be. So your stagnation with the skills is the issue that you're currently facing. There are tons of resources. The most important resource is the official guide, because that's the official set of questions. Other resources, like we'll be sharing any relevant resources that would be pertinent for your prep, from the theory to the questions. But generally, official guide is the most important set of questions because those are the official questions. The non-official questions may slightly deviate from the actual official content, may not be entirely reflective. So official content is the most important content, Anna. For Gmat, for sure. GRE has slightly smaller pool of official questions, but there's tons of material for GRE as well. And we'd be sharing all the relevant material for your prep. If you start familiarizing yourself with the official text, be the official guide theories, etc., it'll do your world of good, because it'll give you a peek into the minds of the makers of the test. It's very few people do that, but if you do that, it'll be of great value. So Joyita, what you probably need is a doubt session with a really focused understanding of where your own approach is at a loss when it comes to applying the concepts that you already know, right? Because we have to be very clear with where your application is where you're messing up the application of the concepts. For that, I would suggest a one-on-one session, which will help you get on top of what the issues are exactly. But there's a clear gap in the skills. Great. Any other questions? I think we can take a couple more if there are. If you have any questions that pop into your head later, you can obviously reach out to us too. How do you achieve that calm mind? I'll use the most corrupted word, practice. It's not a very helpful word, but practice with an intent. Now, there was a student of mine. She ended up scoring a 550 on her actual test. And 2 months down the line, she scored a 720. Vaishnavi was her name. I think it's a couple of years back. So she had a very jittery mind. And what worked for her was meditation. She actively engaged in it. Now, meditation also seems like a very cliche response. But the point is, see, whatever gets you to the state where you feel more stable and less erratic would work. It can be meditation because it does work for quite a few of the people. It can be engaging in an activity which really makes you feel happy, because a happy mind is a calm mind. It can be engaging in sports, in any creative field, probably. You don't just cut yourself out from the things that you like doing because of GMAT prep. Don't isolate yourself into the bubble of GMAT prep, because then you build more pressure around it. Yeah. So meditation is usually helpful for a lot of people, because it is practicing letting the mind just stay alert and focused, and without paying too much heed on the thought. So if we keep pacing forward in our concept coverage, when shall we revise past ones? That's a good question. So by the time you're towards the end of covering the concept, let's say in both quant and verbal, because the concept coverage will take about a couple of months generally for most. So before you get into the mock testing phase of it, which is a really important phase, because that's when you really test yourselves against time, you need to go back and revise all what you have done. Now, this revision won't take the same amount of time as getting comfortable with the concepts would. But the first step of revision is when you're learning them afresh. Just because you've attended a session doesn't mean that you now don't revisit it. You actually have to revisit the session either the same day or the next day at latest to ensure that the concept sticks. So I'll just share this very interesting piece of data, which may be, or rather, it's a finding from a study. If you've learned something new, any skill that is new, this is the retention and this is the time. Retention falls over a period of time with a negative exponential. If you don't revisit the skill often enough, the retention would really dip. So the way to ensure that the retention kind of, stabilizes, you need to revisit those skills at regular intervals. That is how you ensure the retention is at a good point. So the first revision should happen within a couple of days of when you learned that new thing. I'm talking in context of GMAT and GRE sessions. Once you do that, the good thing is the concepts will keep on getting applied in the further sessions as well, because there's a certain structure to the prep, right? We start with the absolute basics one, and those will anyway be always in the play when we move forward with the prep. I hope that answers, Shreyash. Yes, if you still keep forgetting, it means there is a gap in the understanding of the concepts or the application. Otherwise, you should not be forgetting. There's a gap in your understanding that needs to be sorted out. It hasn't yet sunk in. You're probably trying to memorize it, then just letting it sink in. So that must be revisited. Yeah, a one-on-one doubt session is what I would suggest for you as well. It's not about the number of questions. It's about the learning that you churn out of each question. Especially on verbal, you must be very clear with why every option is either wrong or right. You must be clear with why the 4 incorrect options are incorrect, and not just be clear about why the correct one is correct. So focus more on analysis than practicing more number of questions. Whatever greatest number of questions you can practice with in-depth analysis is what you can do without burning yourself out. That is the ideal number of questions you should practice. But don't obsess with the number of questions. Obsess rather with the learning that you can glean out of each question. That'll do. Changing this will change your prep dramatically, Shreyash. Great. So I'll pass the baton now back to Ananya.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Firstly, thank you, Anshuman, for taking us through such immense insights. Like I mentioned, I've given the GMAT before, and there are certain conceptual clarities and certain questions that you want to know, but also have a structure in place, because there's so much information out there. You can take that up through, maybe YouTube videos, and there's all kinds of books and resources available. But till you have somebody guiding you with respect to curated information, structure, and the way you want to prepare for the program, all these questions that I see coming up in terms of memorization and timing and strategy, like these are the things that really differentiate you when you're giving the exam versus, picking up information and keep on practicing it, because anyone can do that. You really need to differentiate yourself. As I mentioned, this is a curated exam. It's not just testing your verbal, English, or quant skills. So hopefully this session was helpful for a lot of you joining. As I mentioned, test prep is a very important aspect. There's of course other aspects to fulfilling your applications if you do have plans to study abroad, with respect to your documentation, SOP, LORs, also shortlisting the right colleges. I get a lot of questions on that as well. But with respect to the GMAT, please make sure you prepare in advance. You need to give yourself that time so that you're not reattempting the exam again and again, because that can be more demoralizing than coming up for the exam the first time around and getting scared. So make sure you give yourself enough time to do that, and working with, just in the right environment with the right people. So I've already shared the contact information. You can definitely reach out to us if you do have further questions, or if you want to sort of take up certain sessions for yourself, whether it's just a few doubt sessions because you're already prepared, or you want to sort of find out what it would be like to prepare wholeheartedly from A to Z. So we'll end the session here because a lot of you have stuck with us on your Sunday afternoons till very long. So I know you guys probably want to go have lunch as well. So we'll stop the session right here. But like I said, do reach out to us if you have any further questions. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you, Anshuman. Thanks once again.
Thank you, everyone who attended the session. It was great interacting with you all. And thanks, Ananya. It was a good one.
Bye.